The bright sun shone down on a scene that was about to get incredibly messy. A group of warriors braced themselves against a massive hydra, looking like they instantly regretted their career choices as they raised their spears in futile defiance. Park Hyun, however, had no time for fear, as he engaged a hulking bald enemy with the grace of a butcher on a deadline. He drove his blade into the monster's neck, eliciting a scream that sounded suspiciously like a rage quit. With blood spraying the air and a cold dead look in his eyes, Park Hyun prepared the finishing blow, treating this terrifying beast like nothing more than a minor inconvenience in his grind for XP. The bandits recoiled, screaming that he was a monster, though they didn't sound too convinced of their own bravery. Park Hyun stood there swaying, his body trembling like a leaf in a storm as exhaustion finally caught up with his adrenaline. Seeing him vulnerable, the mob decided it was the perfect time to stop spectating and start attacking, shouting that he was tired and rushing in to finish the job. But Hyun was fighting his own internal battle. Every breath felt like inhaling razor blades, and he was covered in a warm, sticky fluid he couldn't identify as sweat or blood. As he gripped his hilt with a shaking hand, a grim reality set in. This agonizing physical feedback was way too detailed to just be some fancy graphical effect. The mob swarmed him like angry bees on a picnic basket, screaming that he was finished as they moved in for the kill. As Hyun let out a final desperate roar, the system decided this was the perfect moment to be helpful, spamming him with notifications about unlocking hidden traits like Heart of the Iron-Blooded Monarch and Weapon Master. Naturally, these overpowered buffs arrived exactly 1 second too late, right as the game over screen slapped him in the face. Back in the real world, Park Hyun jolted in his chair, cursing the absolute garbage difficulty of the game he was addicted to. Surrounded by empty bottles and noodle cups, he sat in the dark. A man who had bravely quit his job to pursue the noble career of full-time unemployment and digital masochism while the rest of the world actually worked. Park Hyun sat amidst the wreckage of his life, dwelling on the digital curse, known as Pangenia. The developers had hooked players 5 years ago with a ridiculous promise. Clear the impossible game and they would grant you one real-world dream. Naturally, sane people quit when they realized it was just bait, but Hyun had doubled down with the stubbornness of a mule. He had quit his job and abandoned society to become the sole remaining player, turning his life into a legendary cautionary tale. It was 5 years of grinding for a wish that probably didn't exist, all while surviving on instant noodles and pure spite. The game wasn't just hard. It was a digital torture chamber designed by sociopaths. It featured bosses that made you question the meaning of fairness, companions programmed to stab you in the back the moment you relaxed, and overpowered NPCs that hunted you down like you owed them money. But the cherry on top of this misery sundae was the permadeath feature. If you died, your character and years of progress vanished instantly. While the rest of the world looked at the 0 online players count and moved on with their lives, Hyun had stubbornly managed to hoard 8 of the 15 known unique items, a feat that screamed, "I have absolutely no social life." Yet as he stared at the screen, a paranoid thought began to fester in his sleep-deprived brain. What if the game wasn't just difficult? What if someone was actively rigging it to ensure no one ever reached the end? Just as he was staring into the void of despair, the game decided to hand him the ultimate consolation prize. A system notification popped up awarding him a staggering 1.6 million soul points, or SP, a currency earned by dying, essentially rewarding him for his trauma. Hyun's jaw practically hit the floor as he calculated that his hundreds of previous failed characters combined had barely scraped together 80,000 points. Considering that maxing out a single talent like swordsmanship only cost 10,000 SP, having 1.6 million was the equivalent of winning the lottery in a world where everyone else was trading dirt. A manic grin spread across his face. He realized he didn't need to strategize or compromise anymore, because with this much capital he could simply invest in everything. Normally he would play it safe with a magic build, but with God mode essentially enabled, he clicked his mouse ready to break the game completely. The high of his digital lottery win was quickly soured by a brutal memory of his ex-girlfriend dumping him in a cafe. She had looked him dead in the eye and delivered the classic, "It's not you. It's your complete lack of a future," speech, explaining that she needed a husband with a corporate job, not a high score. After wishing him a nice life, she walked out, leaving him to rot in his mediocrity. Back in the present, Hyun sighed, convinced he would never actually clear the game anyway. Deciding to treat this overpowered run as one final joyride before deleting the app forever, he moved his cursor to the random button, ready to let chaos decide his fate. Embracing the chaos of a man with absolutely nothing left to lose, he smashed the random button, letting the algorithm take the wheel. The screen immediately lit up, furiously consuming his soul points in chunks of 100 to violently rearrange his stats. He watched the digital fireworks, likely expecting a broken, unplayable mess, but the system threw him a curveball that made his eyes widen behind his glasses. Instead of a stat sheet, a rare notification flashed across the monitor declaring that a hidden piece had been activated. The screen flashed a cryptic message congratulating him on satisfying the singularity, which was apparently fancy developer speak for You played this trash game way too much. Suddenly physics decided to take a holiday as a blinding blue light erupted violently, pulling him toward the monitor. A voice roared inside his skull, cursing him as a wicked god and wishing for his worlds to burn to ashes. A bit dramatic for a simple login error. He collapsed on his bedroom floor, clutching his head in agony as his consciousness faded away. As the room went dark, the computer flickered one last time with a mocking wish for him to find happiness. Proving the system definitely had a twisted sense of humor. Hyun woke up not in his ergonomic gaming chair but face first in the dirt, groaning as his senses slowly rebooted. His confusion turned to sheer terror when he looked up and recognized a massive hydreigon looming overhead. A high-level boss that definitely shouldn't be in the starting area. He quickly realized he wasn't a hero but a prisoner in chains, part of a miserable conga line of slaves. The local welcoming committee, a masked guard with serious anger issues, immediately lashed a whip across Hyun's back, screaming at him to get up unless he wanted to be fed to the monster. As the blows rained down, the stinging pain confirmed that this was no longer a game. He had been isekai'd into a nightmare. The reality of the situation hit him harder than the whip as he stared at the hydreigon, confirming he was definitely stuck in Pangea. But panic was quickly replaced by confusion when a familiar blue status window materialized in thin air. Hyun stared at his stats, baffled to see every single attribute sitting at 12, breaking the beginner limit of 10 and effectively making him a level 1 anomaly. Then he noticed the traits. The random button hadn't just given him one perk, it had given him all of them. His list of active hidden traits was longer than a CVS receipt, featuring game-breaking titles like Weapon Master and Heart of the Iron-Blooded Monarch. Naturally, the system couldn't just let him enjoy being a god in peace. It immediately flashed a warning about the world's destruction progress, ensuring his new overpowered life came with a doomsday clock attached. Hyun barely had a moment to admire his broken stats before the ground shook, interrupting his internal monologue with the subtlety of an earthquake. The guard screamed in panic as the Desert Queen arrived, riding atop a massive hydra head like it was a pony and shattering the non-aggression pact. Hyun recognized the Snake Princess, immediately, likely having farmed her dungeon 1,000 times in his past life. But before he could process the cameo, the system chimed in with a new notification. A main quest appeared with the simple objective, survive, but the fine print was less fun. Failure meant death in both the game and reality, proving the developers really hated their player base. The peaceful negotiation ended abruptly when the sky decided to rain sharp, pointy death upon the slaves. Chaos erupted as arrows turned the gathered crowd into pincushions, leaving Hyun stunned amidst the screams. But just as panic threatened to paralyze him, his cheat codes finally clocked in for work. The Heart of the Iron-Blooded Monarch activated, washing away his fear with a cold, unnatural calm. Suddenly, the battlefield wasn't a nightmare. It was just data to be processed. Spotting a discarded sword near a fallen comrade, Hyun realized that staying still was a game over he wasn't willing to accept. The moment his fingers curled around the hilt, the Weapon Master trait kicked in, instantly downloading a lifetime of violence directly into his muscles. His body was enveloped in a blue aura that practically screamed main character energy as he surged forward. He slashed through the first bandit with terrifying precision, the blade cutting through him like he was made of butter. The slavers were hopelessly outmatched. Hyun danced through their ranks, dodging their clumsy strikes and countering with lethal efficiency, treating this life-or-death battle like a casual speedrun he had memorized perfectly. The slavers rushed him, likely thinking their numbers would make up for their complete lack of skill. But Hyun was moving like he had a lag switch installed in his brain, dodging spears and axes with the casual indifference of someone avoiding chores on a Sunday. As he gripped the hilt, he marveled at the absurdity of it all. He had zero combat experience, yet his body moved with the precision of a grandmaster. The Weapon Master trait wasn't just a stat boost. It was basically an aimbot for real life. He sliced upward, turning a screaming attacker into an immediate spectator, proving that in this world stats definitely matter more than effort. The bandits recoiled, screaming that he was a monster, though they didn't sound too convinced of their own bravery. Park Hyun stood there swaying, his body trembling like a leaf in a storm as exhaustion finally caught up with his adrenaline. Seeing him vulnerable, the mob decided it was the perfect time to stop spectating and start attacking, shouting that he was tired and rushing in to finish the job. But Hyun was fighting his own internal battle. Every breath felt like inhaling razor blades, and he was covered in a warm, sticky fluid he couldn't identify as sweat or blood. As he gripped his hilt with a shaking hand, a grim reality set in. This agonizing physical feedback was way too detailed to just be some fancy graphical effect. But Hyun wasn't just fighting. He was downloading a tutorial on violence directly into his brain. His masterful hands trait let him visualize the path of every strike, turning the battle into a rhythm game he couldn't lose. As he sliced through them with expert precision, his weapon proficiency skyrocketed to level 6 instantly, baffling even himself. However, Staring down an army of 500, he realized this was still a bullcrap quest. Meanwhile, a shadowy figure ordered the Snake Princess to massacre every survivor to cover up a failed expedition, promising to lift her curse if she wiped the map clean. Standing over his defeated foes, the system rewarded Hyun with the sweetest notification a gamer can see: a level up. His fatigue vanished instantly, replaced by a full heal that left him looking like he just stepped out of a spa rather than a bloodbath. While the other slaves stared in stunned silence, Hyun gaped at his status window. Every stat was broken at 12, and worse, he realized he didn't just have one special ability. He had 13 hidden traits, effectively making him a walking cheat code. But his victory lap was cut short when the ground quaked, signaling that the Snake Princess was done watching and ready to start the real slaughter. Hyun's victory celebration was instantly strangled by fear as he recognized the woman atop the Hydra: Isabella von Dergen, the infamous Snake Princess. She wasn't just a bandit leader. She was a named NPC, a level 8 catastrophe that walked like a human. In Pangenia, the power gap between level 7 and anything above it wasn't just a stat difference. It was the difference between a player and a literal god. Isabella surveyed the massacre with cold indifference, remembering her secret orders to eliminate all witnesses to cover up a failed expedition. She stepped off her massive mount, her heels clicking on the blood-soaked ground as she casually approached the exhausted survivor. Praising his little slaughter with the tone of someone complimenting a dancing monkey, she simply declared that he had to die, flaring a green aura that screamed absolute unavoidable death. Isabella lunged with speed that defied physics, intent on turning Hyun into a kebab. Knowing he couldn't win a fair fight against a level 8 calamity, Hyun pulled out his ultimate weapon. Spoilers. Just as her blade grazed his neck, he calmly asked if she wanted to break the queen's curse, effectively stunning her mid-strike. Confused by this slave who knew her deepest secret, she demanded his identity. Hyun, leaning fully into the role of a mysterious prophet, introduced himself as the Star Bearer and offered a simple trade: his life for the solution to the curse that trapped her in this sandy hellhole. The gamble paid off, instantly freezing the Snake Princess in her tracks before she could turn him into a memory. Hyun knew exactly which button to push. Despite being a level 8 catastrophe capable of wiping out the map, Isabella was shackled to this desert by the status ailment, living like a caged bird. The only key to her freedom was a Star Bearer, a rare NPC class that he was currently impersonating with complete confidence. Seeing her desperation override her bloodlust, he knew he had won. When she lowered her guard and demanded his name, he buried his old identity without a second thought, introducing himself as Randolph. The system immediately locked in his new identity, officially registering him as Randolph the moment the bluff landed. Isabella decided to reschedule his execution, turning her back with a terrifying promise to rip him into confetti if he turned out to be a fraud. She ordered her confused minions to treat the former slave as an honored guest, which was essentially a VIP kidnapping. As the adrenaline faded, the system went into overdrive, spamming him with rewards for clearing the survival quest with such style. Thanks to his beginner's luck, he hit the jackpot, acquiring the soul of the Hydragon and the legendary sword of Michaela, before finally collapsing from sheer exhaustion. Later, soaking in a luxury bath that was a definite upgrade from the dirt floor, he reviewed his new broken items, realizing his gamble had paid off in spades. Relaxing in a tub that probably cost more than his entire life savings, Hyun reviewed his loot. He had snagged the soul of the Hydragon, an item so rare its drop rate was practically a statistical error, alongside a legendary sword. But the real kicker was the golden scale, a mysterious item offering synchronization, with reality, implying this nightmare might be a two-way street. His strategic soaking was interrupted when 3 chambermaids entered, offering a service that set off every alarm bell in his head. Realizing this was Isabella's final test, he knew that as a star bearer, getting excited was strictly prohibited. He sat there like a stone statue, mentally reciting prime numbers to suppress his instincts while the maids went to work. Just as he survived the thirst trap, a holographic leaderboard appeared, displaying his name at the top and a terrifying countdown regarding the shattering of reality. The system wasn't done dropping bombs. A red warning flashed, declaring that the boundary between reality and Pangenia was shattering like a countdown to doomsday. But the real shock came from the leaderboard. Below his name were Gracia and I Love Mint Chocolate, old guildmates who had vanished years ago, confirming they weren't just offline but trapped in this world too. Before the existential dread could set in, the log-out feature unlocked, offering a golden ticket home. Hyun shot up from the bath, desperate to leave, but was intercepted by the confused maids. Thinking fast, he barked that he needed absolute privacy to communicate with the stars, a holy excuse that successfully scared them away. Finally alone, he smashed the log-out button, ready to abandon this nightmare for his comfortable noodle-filled reality. The system booted him out, and Hyun woke up back in the safety of his messy room, likely ready to kiss the floor in gratitude. But his relief was shorter than his bank account balance. A glance out the window revealed that the log-out button was a lie, or rather the game had decided to log in to reality. The city was engulfed in flames, and massive insectoid monsters from Pangenia were currently treating the neighborhood like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The synchronization wasn't a glitch. It was an invasion, and his quiet life was officially cancelled. Park Hyun jolted awake in his gaming chair, his mind still reeling from the vivid nightmare of ancient armies and high-octane sword fights that felt far too real to be just a game. He frantically turned to his computer hoping to see the familiar game homepage, but the screen mocked him with a page not found error that suggested his sanity was also currently offline. He scoffed at the situation, refusing to believe he was stuck in a generic web novel plot until he felt a strange and impossible weight in his pocket. He pulled out the golden artifact he had just looted in the game, and as he stared at the physical proof of his bad luck, a massive monster appeared behind him to officially welcome him to the end of the world. His phone screamed with a disaster alert, confirming that outside his window the neighborhood had officially turned into an all-you-can-eat buffet for a giant mantis. While the police tried to fight the beast with bullets that looked about as effective as throwing pebbles at a tank, Hyun realized the logic here was simple. If the monsters were real, then his loot had to be too. He scrambled to his desk and grabbed the glowing bag, and sure enough, the system recognized Michaela's sword and Hydreigon's soul right there in his bedroom. A blue status window popped up to kindly inform him that the boundary between reality and the game was crumbling, listing his absurdly long list of hidden traits as the only thing standing between him and becoming bug food. The streets outside had turned into a literal slaughterhouse, with police bullets proving about as useful as spitballs against the giant mantises tearing through the city. While civilians ran for their lives, Hyun dumped his loot bag, staring at the legendary items with the desperate confusion of a gamer realizing he couldn't just double-click reality to equip a weapon. He fumbled with the fragment of the broken golden scale, and as it hit the floor, the system finally decided to stop trolling him. A blinding light engulfed the room as the artifact bridged the dimensions, announcing that his synchronization with his overpowered character Randolph was finally complete. While Hyun marveled at his new interface, the streets outside had descended into absolute chaos. A mother desperately fled with her child, dodging falling concrete until a massive slab pinned her to the ground, effectively ending her run. With her legs crushed, she tearfully urged her daughter Yoonji to abandon her and survive, just as a grotesque plant monster loomed over the weeping child, ready for an easy meal. The beast lunged, certain of its kill, but a sudden flash of steel intercepted the attack, slicing through the air and saving the girl with a timing so perfect it had to be scripted. The massive sword slammed down and obliterated the carnivorous plant with a force that turned the predator into immediate compost. The woman on the ground stared up in disbelief, her brain struggling to process the man standing casually atop the slain beast like he was posing for a game cover art. While the child looked on in awe, Hyun commanded them to stay still, his presence so overwhelming that the survivors wondered if they were hallucinating or if a literal hero had just dropped out of the sky. The woman stared at Hyun's back, wondering if a literal god had descended to save them, but this miracle was actually part of a global server update as monsters dismantled civilization from Seoul to Paris. Yet humanity wasn't finished, as other awakened players began carving through the beasts, and the system immediately gamified the apocalypse by posting a global leaderboard. While Hyun sat comfortably at rank 1, a player named Massacre watched from the shadows, scoffing at these heroes for wasting their precious golden fragments on saving civilians instead of hoarding power for the selfish era to come. The global chat buzzed with speculation about Randolph, but the veterans recognized him immediately as Phantom, the absolute madman who led the only expedition to ever reach the game's finale. His legendary run hadn't failed because of a difficult boss, but because his own hired NPCs decided that betrayal was the meta, stabbing him in the back right at the finish line. Massacre pieced it all together with a sinister grin. The apocalypse had physically transformed players into their in-game avatars. Even though their gear had been reset to 0, their latent talents remained, meaning the number 1 ranker wasn't just lucky. He was a gaming god starting a new game with cheat codes already enabled. Standing before Isabella, who seemed equal parts intrigued and annoyed by his presence, Hyun wasted no time with pleasantries. She asked if he was finished communing with the stars, but he simply demanded to be taken to the sanctuary, a request that made her look at him like he had a death wish. While she questioned his sanity, Hyun smirked, knowing exactly what was hidden inside. The system confirmed his plan with a new quest to obtain a class, and for Hyun, the sanctuary wasn't a death trap. It was just an unloaded treasure chest waiting to be cracked open. Rewinding the clock a few hours, Park Hyun looked at the terrifying snake princess and casually demanded she smuggle him into the forbidden sanctuary. Isabella looked at him like he had asked to juggle live grenades, questioning his sanity for wanting to enter such a restricted zone. But our protagonist had his eyes on the prize, specifically a hidden class called the Star that only he knew how to find thanks to his past gaming addiction. He dangled the cure for her curse like a carrot on a stick, reminding her that this was her only ticket out of the desert. The manipulation worked like a charm, because moments later Isabella was clearing out the guards with the efficiency of a high-level vacuum cleaner, proving there is no ally more reliable than a desperate woman with knives. Back in the present, Park Hyun gulped, realizing that one wrong word earlier would have turned his head into a permanent floor decoration. They stood before the holy ground, which the system immediately flagged as a poisonous death trap for low-level scrubs. Thankfully, his Giant's Demon Resistance trait kicked in like a spiritual hazmat suit, saving him from an instant game over. While he briefly considered using Isabella to farm exploration points, he prioritized the new main quest, obtaining a class. He grinned, knowing exactly which overpowered secret class lay waiting for him, but Isabella suddenly whipped around, sensing something amiss in the shadows. The Snake Princess abruptly stopped him, smugly revealing that the bridge ahead was actually a wind-powered death trap designed to flush idiots into the abyss. She took a moment to mock his lack of awareness. "Are you too scared to proceed?" Hyun asked, possessing the dignity of a wet sock. She claimed she had a sudden, crippling leg cramp. He argued that since the Queen's guards would be on their tail by dawn, the only logical solution was for him to carry her like a backpack. Hyun hoisted her up and leaped across the dangerous chasm with terrifying agility, proving that high-level stats really do solve everything. Mid-air, Isabella panicked, screaming that he was guiding them straight into the void like a broken GPS. But Hyun wasn't crazy. He just had mutant vision, a hidden trait that lit up invisible secrets like neon signs. They stuck the landing on a hidden staircase, leaving the Snake Princess baffled that he knew a path even she, the local boss, didn't. As they climbed, Hyun cheekily asked if the terrifying assassin was afraid of heights, dodging her anger with a smirk. Watching him stroll through the poisonous atmosphere like it was a park, she finally couldn't hold back her suspicion and asked if they had met before. Isabella questioned his cryptic riddles about knowing her without ever meeting, but the awkward conversation was cut short as they shattered the magical barrier at the summit. They touched down in a deceptive field of flowers, but Hyun immediately identified it as a domain barrier, a hallucination designed to trap the gullible. Right on cue, the peaceful facade crumbled as the canyon walls cracked open, birthing a squad of magma-infused rock golems ready to turn our heroes into pavement. Hyun instantly realized he was out of his depth, noting that the guardian golem was an upper-tier monster whose massive stone fists would delete his HP bar with a single graze. Hyun, on the other hand, treated the lethal situation as a joke, teasing her about her earlier cramp while effortlessly dodging the falling debris. She flashed a predatory smile, promising that the pile of rocks would be rubble soon enough, proving she was the carry for a reason. Isabella dismantled the upper-tier golem with such terrifying speed that even Hyun, who designed her character, was left sweating at the sheer absurdity of her power. Since the game registered them as a party, the system generously offered him the Golem Maker class, a high-tier rare profession that most players would kill for. However, he hit the decline button without a millisecond of hesitation, treating the rare offer like spam mail. As Isabella stood confused in the aftermath, Hyun smirked, knowing that the true prize, a class far superior to a mere summoner, was about to emerge from the ominous purple shadows surrounding them. The ominous purple mist thickened, coalescing into a massive form that definitely wasn't a refund receipt. From the shadows emerged the ancient King Dramit, a serpentine deity so large it made the previous golem look like a pebble. This was the greater god who guards the stars, the only entity capable of granting him the broken class he actually came for. The sheer pressure made Park Hyun realize they were facing the Mountain Guardian, yet he still possessed the audacity to assure Isabella that the colossal reptile was actually a gentle soul who never struck first. As if on cue to humiliate him, the snake immediately lunged with the subtlety of a freight train, forcing Isabella to dodge a strike that would have reset her to factory settings. The Guardian demanded she prove her worth as a challenger, completely ignoring her frantic denials, while Park Hyun stood there scratching his head in confusion because he remembered this death noodle being a helpful guide. Isabella could only stare back at him with eyes that screamed she was seriously questioning his mental state. While Isabella played a deadly game of tag with the giant serpent screaming for instructions, Park Hyun was busy taking a leisurely trip down memory lane. He suddenly realized why this overgrown reptile used to be so friendly. Back when he played as Wilhelm, a max-level transcendent character, his sheer power made the snake act like a polite tour guide. It turned out Dramit was just a typical bully who only respected raw strength. If you were weaker than him, you were lunch. Unfortunately for Isabella, Hyun's current stats were nowhere near god tier, leaving her to take a brutal hit that sent her crashing into the dirt. To make matters worse, the sanctuary's poison began paralyzing her body just as the Guardian delivered his final ultimatum: prove their worth or die right there. Seeing that Isabella was paralyzed by poison and about to become snake food, Park Hyun stepped forward and shouted the beast's true name, stopping the attack mid-air. The massive serpent was baffled, demanding to know how a weakling knew his identity. Hyun decided to double down on the bluff, smirking as he announced that his former avatar Wilhelm had returned. Unfortunately, Dramit wasn't senile. He remembered Wilhelm as a transcendent god, while the man standing before him was statistically weaker than a rock golem. The snake roared with laughter at the audacity, finding it hilarious that this fragile human would dare impersonate his all-powerful master. Dramit immediately shut down the identity theft, claiming the real Wilhelm died a permanent death in the demon realm and that this weakling was just a snack with a death wish. But just as the snake prepared to chomp, Park Hyun played his ace card, commanding the beast to honor their ancient contract. This paralyzed the beast with shock. That pact was classified under penalty of death, yet this nobody knew the fine print verbatim. Hyun was actually gambling on a loophole. Since the contract was signed by his high-level alt Wilhelm, his current character Randolph technically wasn't breaking the non-disclosure agreement. With the snake now thoroughly confused, Hyun pushed his luck further, demanding to be taken to the star to prove his identity, taunting that perhaps the Guardian was just afraid the artifact would confirm who really owned him. The gamble paid off, and the giant serpent, likely fearing a celestial lawsuit over a contract breach, agreed to play tour guide. Isabella followed in silence, her face showing the blank expression of someone whose brain had officially stopped trying to process the madness. When they arrived at the altar, the legendary star turned out to be a literal human skull sitting ominously on a pedestal. Park Hyun casually explained that this wasn't a morbid paperweight but the actual face of the goddess Leah. According to the lore, the deity had shattered into 32 fragments that served as catalysts for transcendence. As he picked up the divine remains, the skull began to glow, violently reacting to his touch, as if it recognized an old friend. Dramat watched with sadistic glee, convinced the star would barbecue Park Hyun for his arrogance. But while the snake waited for a scream, Hyun was just annoyed knowing he was safe because he hadn't used a glitch to skip the boss encounter, a specific condition required for the star to kill a player. Instead of turning him into toast, the skull scanned his hidden traits, cycling through legendary titles like a slot machine, hitting the jackpot before settling on Void. The energy surged, converting his mana into star energy and gifting him overpowered skills like Star Pierce, proving once again that reading the game manual is the ultimate superpower. Isabella stared in horror as Park Hyun absorbed the star, her brain struggling to process how a human could consume a divine artifact without exploding into confetti. Ignoring the laws of physics he just broke, Hyun immediately pivoted to recruitment, asking what she planned to do once her curse was lifted. When she confessed her desire to find the lost Dersian bloodline, he offered a classic protagonist trade: serve him for 1 year and he'd grant her freedom. Isabella hesitated only for a second, then dropped to her knees and pledged her loyalty, officially signing up as the first member of his party. Hyun grinned, realizing he had just secured a high-level bodyguard for the low price of a future favor. With the contract secure, Park Hyun decided to rub salt in the wound, forcing the terrifying mountain guardian to bow its head like a scolded puppy. The system immediately flooded his vision with notifications awarding him a unique rank for his sheer recklessness, and noting that the combat constellations were now watching his suicidal bravery with great interest. But the victory lap was cut short the moment the scene shifted. Instead of a hero's welcome, they were met by a hostile crowd ordering the guards to seize them immediately. It appeared that while Isabella had entered as a noble with a slave, the people outside were no longer interested in playing by the rules. Meanwhile, back in the civilized world, the rumor mill is spinning faster than a centrifuge. A trio of players has huddled in a coffee shop to discuss the sudden reappearance of the legendary ghost player Phantom, who has finally surfaced under the alias Randolph. While the two muscle-bound guys stress about making contact, the blonde strategist proposes a plan that is equal parts genius and scummy: phishing. She deduces that after his record-breaking class change score of 230 points, Randolph will be desperate for gear to secure first place in the next quest. Her scheme is to bait him with a top-tier item listed dirt cheap in the secret auction hall, using a hidden talisman to track the buyer and effectively doxing the most elusive player in history. The two henchmen remain skeptical, arguing that a veteran like Phantom would never fall for such a transparent trap. But their leader ignores logic, blinded by admiration for his chaotic playstyle. She argues that anyone crazy enough to initiate the Great Expedition after a failure is unpredictable enough to take the bait. She spirals into a manic rant, speculating he's a real-life billionaire, and screams that they must kidnap him, quickly correcting herself to invite as her team looks on in horror. Elsewhere, the mood is far grimmer. A player named Massacre sits alone in a dark alley, staring at a system notification that has just revoked his access to the main quest and the auction hall. Instead of raging, he accepts the penalty with a defeated sigh, muttering that none of it matters anymore. Massacre's bad day ends abruptly as he is slaughtered, his body dissolving into pixels just as the system flags the subquest as complete. On the flip side of victory, Randolph and Isabella stick the landing, securing the first Conqueror title and a convenient epic-grade teleport book to escape the dungeon. As the rewards roll in, he hits level 3 but immediately notices the catch. His overpowered Star Successor class demands 10 times the usual experience points thanks to his greed for talents. However, seeing his stats skyrocket to numbers that shouldn't exist for a beginner, he decides the hellish grind might actually be a fair trade. Hyun was busy admiring his loot, snagging a shadow cloak that granted free invisibility, essentially a cheat code for anyone trying to avoid responsibility. But his unboxing session was rudely interrupted when Dramat sensed intruders breaching the sanctuary. Isabella immediately recognized them as the Queen's pursuit squad and started spiraling, convinced that even with a giant snake they were doomed. Park Hyun, however, had zero intention of doing manual labor today. He casually threw on his new cloak and pointed out the obvious. Why fight when the Guardian can do it for them? With a shameless command for Dramat to actually earn his keep, he grabbed Isabella and bailed into the shadows, leaving the bewildered snake to deal with the angry mob alone. As chaos erupted behind them with the soldiers screaming about a sea serpent, the duo sprinted across the desert. Park Hyun assured a worried Isabella that since the queen herself hadn't shown up, this was likely just an eager advance unit. He quickly clarified that he wasn't heartlessly ditching Dramit. The Guardian was physically incapable of leaving the sanctuary, so running was their only option. Their target was the warp gate at the desert's edge, but as they arrived at the massive stone archway, Isabella dropped the bad news. The ancient tech needed a solid half-day to warm up. With absolutely no cover in the open sands, they were sitting ducks, but Park Hyun saw a silver lining. While Dramit bought them time, he decided this was the perfect moment to log out and check on reality before things got worse. Hyun hesitated, asking if he could actually trust her to hold the line. Isabella gripped her sword and delivered a heartfelt, "I will protect you," which was apparently code for, "I'm going AFK now, good luck," as he immediately dissolved into blue data pixels. He woke up in his real bed, shaking off the disorientation to check the news, relieved to see the monster invasion hadn't started trending on social media yet. He knew the worlds were merging, but his real-life problems were faster. A text arrived from Kim Seoyeon. The name triggered a bitter memory of her calling him cheap in a cafe, proving that even with the world ending, past drama never dies. Memories of their toxic past resurfaced, specifically the time she called him cheap and blew him off to meet other friends, while he footed the bill for her lifestyle. Meanwhile, Seoyeon sat in a cafe waiting for him, convincing herself that despite his pathetic bank account, his blind obedience was something she shouldn't have discarded so easily. When Park Hyun finally arrived, she immediately plastered on a bright smile, acting as if she hadn't just been calculating his utility. She poured on the charm, confessing deep regret over their breakup and asking if he missed her too, completely unaware of how transparent she was. Park Hyun, however, was distracted by the one drink per person sign on the wall, realizing that for all her talk of undying love, she hadn't even bothered to buy him a coffee. Park Hyun decided he had enough of this cheap date and stood up to leave, prompting a desperate Seoyeon to grab his arm and scream about how much she missed him. He shut her down instantly by asking if her current boyfriend knew she was here, pointing out that she really should have scrubbed her social media if she wanted to play the double agent. As he walked away, ignoring her cries, he realized his in-game stats were definitely leaking into reality. He felt unnervingly calm. That composure was immediately tested when a maniac with a box cutter lunged out of the crowd, screaming about being looked down upon. Bystanders shrieked, but before the blade could connect, Hyun instinctively caught the attacker's wrist, stopping the lethal strike with the ease of swatting a fly. The attacker's confidence evaporated the moment his blade hit an immovable wall, leaving him staring in shock at the hand gripping his wrist. Park Hyun didn't give him a chance to recover. He brutally twisted the attacker's arm, forcing the weapon down with a strength that clearly didn't belong in a casual cafe setting. With a cold, bored expression, he simply told the asshole that was enough, treating the life-or-death struggle like a minor inconvenience. With a swift motion, Park Hyun slammed the attacker into the pavement, tossing him aside like trash. He stared at his hand, realizing that even without using the golden scale, his in-game stats had made him strong enough to snap bones like twigs. He checked on the trembling woman, who profusely thanked him, but as their eyes met, a memory clicked. She looked exactly like a victim he had seen during a future monster attack. Deciding not to get involved, he brushed it off and turned to leave, but the humiliated attacker wasn't done. Screaming in rage, the man lunged at Hyun's back, only for Hyun to spin around and casually catch the guy's entire head in one hand, stopping him by knocking him out. The police arrived to haul the trash away, but then displayed their brilliance by demanding Park Hyun come to the station for assault. Before Hyun could lose his temper, the woman stepped up, flashing a press pass that identified her as Kim Hannah from CK Broadcasting. She coolly threatened to televise their harassment of a Good Samaritan, causing the officers to suddenly remember they had urgent business elsewhere. With the law out of the way, Hannah thanked him and handed over a card that piqued his interest. She wasn't just a reporter. She was specifically covering Dimension Warriors. Park Hyun realized Dimension Warrior was just a media-friendly term for players, confirming the world was still oblivious to the true nature of the system. Hannah kindly asked for his business card, but before he could answer, Seoyeon latched onto his arm, desperately demanding to know if the reporter was his new girlfriend. He shook the ex off with a firm refusal, clarifying he had no business card to give while completely ignoring Seoyeon's tantrum. Unfazed by the drama, Hannah simply asked for his number instead, saving it as Park Hyun Myung and promising to treat him to coffee, a stark contrast to the girl who never paid for anything. As Hannah breezed away, Seoyeon was left trembling in humiliated rage, unable to process that the nobody she dumped was suddenly out of her league. Back in the desert, the queen's soldiers surrounded the exhausted Isabella, demanding she hand over the slave sitting motionless behind her. When she refused, they branded her a traitor and swarmed in, eager to execute them both right there. Just as the situation looked fatal, the massive warp gate behind them finally roared to life, bathing the area in blinding blue light. Isabella stumbled, her strength finally failing, but a hand caught her before she hit the sand. Park Hyun had successfully logged back in, flashing a confident grin as he told her she'd done well. He stepped forward, his hand glowing with golden energy, and announced that since she kept her promise to protect him, he would now return the favor by absolutely obliterating their enemies. Park Hyun didn't hold back, dumping every ounce of his star energy to trigger Star Pierce, a move that turned the battlefield into a blinding gold supernova. The Queen's soldiers were instantly vaporized, leaving Isabella staring in awe at the undeniable power of a star bearer. Amidst the wreckage, Hyun offered her one last out, telling her she could still return to her old life if she wanted. Isabella didn't hesitate for a second, rejecting the offer and vowing to stay by his side. That loyalty paid off instantly. The system shattered her curse of limits, just as the warp gate whisked them away to the central continent. They arrived in Arcana, the Golden City, a place so aggressively materialistic that the system warned players to avoid the rich districts unless their wallets could handle the pressure. Park Hyun stepped into the extravagant streets, realizing he'd traded a desert of death for a city of greed. Isabella tried to be the hero by revealing her secret stash of 300 gold coins, proudly declaring it was enough to buy 10 slaves back home. Park Hyun immediately popped her bubble, casually informing her that in this hyperinflated economy, her entire life savings would barely cover a cheap motel for the night. While she spiraled over the horrific exchange rate, Hyun pointed his thumb at a flashy casino sign, deciding that high-stakes gambling was the most responsible financial strategy available. Isabella looked terrified, but Hyun flashed a confident smirk, claiming he was just lucky. Naturally, he was lying. It wasn't luck, it was his hidden trait, Blessing of Gold, activating to ensure the house was about to lose everything. Arcana wasn't just a city. It was a capitalist fever dream called the City of Pleasures, where the only law written in stone was that money talks and poverty walks. Naturally, Park Hyun led them straight to the Temple of Greed itself, the Hudson Casino. But their winning streak hit a literal wall. A bouncer who demanded a 10,000 gold deposit just to breathe the air inside. Isabella nearly fainted, frantically whispering that they were broke while the guard sneered and tried to shoo away the beggars, blocking his line. Unbothered by the insults, Hyun simply pulled out a glowing gem, offering the priceless artifact as collateral to shut the guy up. The bouncer's attitude did a complete 180 at the sight of the gem, immediately ushering them inside with VIP treatment. A panicked Isabella demanded to know what he just handed over, and Hyun casually dropped the bomb. It was the Fairy Queen's tear, an immortal-grade talisman worth at least 1 million gold. While she hyperventilated over him pawning a national treasure, Hyun strolled onto the casino floor, assuring her it was just a temporary loan until he bankrupted the house. And he wasn't bluffing. His Blessing of Gold trait turned the roulette wheel into his personal ATM, landing win after miraculous win until the crowd was screaming that the god of gambling had descended. In minutes, he turned a handful of coins into a staggering 1.4 million gold, scooping up the mountain of chips while a stunned Isabella tried to remind him that this empire was technically built on her lunch money. The casino staff quickly handed over the winnings, desperate to get rid of him. They politely informed Hyun that he was officially banned from the premises, mostly because every other player in the room had started copying his bets and cleaning the house out. Before he could even argue, a squad of burly security guards in suits surrounded the table, led by a floor manager who coldly ordered them to leave immediately. Isabella's eyes began to glow with demonic red energy, ready to turn the Golden City into a graveyard. But Hyun calmly raised a hand to stop her. Instead of fighting the hired muscle, Hyun looked the manager dead in the eye and demanded a meeting with the owner. The manager tried to refuse, but Hyun smirked, telling him that once his boss took a closer look at the collateral left at the front desk, he'd be the one begging for a meeting. He wasn't bluffing. In the penthouse office, the casino owner sat staring at the glowing blue gem on his desk, his composure completely shattering. It was the Fairy Queen's tear, a legendary immortal-grade item that only dropped from knights who could wipe out entire armies. The owner trembled, realizing the beggar downstairs had casually handed over a national treasure worth more than the entire casino. Intrigued by the arrogant gambler who knew exactly what he had, Hudson ordered him brought up immediately. Face to face, Hudson was confused by Hyun's underwhelming appearance, but tried to maintain control of the conversation. Hyun didn't let him. He cut straight to the chase, revealing he knew Hudson was a secret collector desperate for the item. Cornered by the truth, Hudson dropped the act and offered 2 million gold to buy it outright, a sum that nearly gave Isabella a stroke right there in the office. Park Hyun stated that 2 million was too low. He would only sell it for 20 million. The merchant scoffed at the initial offer, arguing that 20 gold was mansion money and refusing to overpay for what he thought was a simple weapon-forging talisman. Park Hyun cut through the nonsense, revealing the Fairy Queen's tear's true purpose. It was a cheat code allowing a weak casino owner to equip high-tier gear and bypass the level 10 requirement for the city council. It was the only way he could ever hope to impress the family of his fiancée Serengeti, the legendary pure white knight who once led 500 soldiers. The name triggered a dark memory for Park Hyun. In his past life as a gamer, Serengeti had been his right hand, a loyal NPC who sacrificed both her legs to the Demon King just to save him. A tragedy he had dismissed as scripted drama at the time. But as he recalled the description of her necklace, a glaring inconsistency emerged. In the original game data, the pure White Knight had absolutely no fiancé. Someone had hacked the narrative parameters, meaning Hudson wasn't an NPC but another assimilated player who had arrived in this world long before Park did. As the terrified merchant stammered, asking how his deepest secret was exposed, Park Hyun realized he had just found a crucial source of information that he intended to drain dry. Park Hyun dismissed the gold, telling the merchant he didn't need money but rather compliance with a single simple condition. Adopting the persona of a mystic, he claimed the stars had whispered the man's secrets, demanding Hudson recite his entire life story to prove his truthfulness. It was a brutal request. In this world, revealing one's identity as a player was practically suicide, inviting execution by hunters, NPCs specifically programmed to slaughter criminals like them. Yet Park Hyun knew the man was trapped. Gazing at the locket of the woman who was clearly more than just code to him, Hudson finally surrendered, agreeing to spill his history regardless of the danger. But when Park mentioned the 8 heroes and the infighting that doomed the expedition, Hudson looked at him like he was crazy. In this world's twisted history, Wilhelm was the sole hero and the betrayal Park knew as fact was dismissed as nonsense. While they argued over lore, the real Gracia, now living as a high-ranking hero in the US, saw Park's Manta stunt on the news. Ignoring government orders to stay safe, he immediately booked a trip to Korea, sensing that this monster rider was the anomaly he had been waiting for. Like and subscribe for more videos.